Ben Johnson might be the most hyped coordinator going to head coach I can remember, honestly. He's been the Lions OC for the last 3 years, second in EPA per play during that span, and third in yards per play during that span as well for Ben Johnson. I remember after his first year as the Lions OC, he was getting looks for head coaching jobs. I believe he denied the Panthers job right after his first year, and then he declined the Commanders job last year. He's been biding his time, waiting for the perfect job to open up, and to him, at least, he thinks this Bears job is the one for him.
The perfect job, and even all the way up to examining the front office. I believe he wanted that Jacksonville job, and Trent Baalke's what prevented him from taking that too, so he pivoted to the Bears and liked that situation better. You mentioned it. I mean, just an unstoppable offense the last 3 years. 7th in offensive grading in 2022, 2nd in each of the last 2 years. I mean, we've just watched this Lions team tear everybody apart, and now I think what you get with Ben Johnson, and we'll talk about Dennis Allen in a minute, is a complete transition in what the goals are going to be for an offense, assuming Johnson, keeps the same philosophy he did in Detroit. Heavy running the ball, heavy play action, heavy thrown over the middle. And those are all things the Bears really did not do this past year. We saw Caleb taking way too many dropbacks, obviously falling behind early in games. You have to when you're trying to get back into it, and that's usually when Caleb was his best, playing hero ball. But they have to be able to work in structure in this offense, really created an identity because, the stretch early in the season when the Bears looked halfway decent, they had a little bit of balance, right? And I think obviously the interior of the offensive line has been a focus. It's going to be this offseason, but you've got a good pair of tackles in Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright. They did a nice job running off tackle, getting in the bootleg game, and then there was just times they just almost willingly got away from it. And then there was Shane Waldron getting fired and Thomas Brown running the team, Eberflus getting fired. It was just a whole... They just never knew. It felt like they came in last year and never knew what they wanted to do in Chicago. And it showed on the field. It showed in the play calling. And I think they just never had a handle on, okay, this is how we're going to make it. Just like I talked about, trying to making Baker Mayfield's life easier, making Trevor Lawrence's life easier. At no point did they make Caleb Williams' life easy. So, there is a part where did he play all that well? Not really. I know the traditional stats would tell you, but I think, what was it, a 65 passing grade, if that's somewhere around there. Early in games, you could tell there was just no plan. They went out there, and there was too many 3-and-outs in the first quarter. They were one of the worst offenses in the league in their first 15 plays in the first quarter, first half, however you want to put it. Now you have Ben Johnson, who always has a plan. He's got a 7-layered plan for everything. He's got trick plays with people pretending to fall over, and everything the Bears have seen the last few years. I just think you have a level of creativity and, in theory, a level of execution that just has not existed with the Bears in a long time, and now it's just about developing Caleb into that and working within that structure.
Absolutely, and don't get me wrong, the Lions were supremely talented offensively during his tenure there, but also I think a big reason why they're second in EPA per play over the last 3 years, he was maybe the most creative offensive coordinator we had in the NFL as well. So I'm really excited. You have one of the most creative, or maybe the most creative offensive mind that we have in the NFL in Ben Johnson. And you have a quarterback in Caleb Williams who is hyped up as being one of the most creative quarterback prospects we've had in recent memory as well. I think there is a limitless ceiling with what he could do with Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams together. I'm really excited about that pairing, and that's really why they hired him overall. The offensive coordinator for the Bears now is Declan Doyle. He was the Broncos tight ends coach, a lot like Ben Johnson, who was a former tight ends coach, then turned the Lions OC, trying to do the same thing with Declan Doyle, going from the Broncos tight ends coach to the Bears OC. And then Dennis Allen, the former Saints head coach, is now the defensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears as well.
Yeah, no, I think Dennis Allen is the interesting one there. And you see with all three of these guys, there's kind of a loose Sean Payton connection there with Doyle, being under Payton last year as his tight ends coach, and he was under Dennis Allen 1 year in New Orleans. He was under Sean Payton since 2018, I believe it was, in New Orleans. So you have, I think, in Doyle, Johnson's going to call the plays. We know this. There's no question about that. He's not giving up play calling. And Doyle's younger than me, in fact, so I don't think he's going to. Wow. Yeah, I think he's 28, 29 years old, somewhere in there. And what you have, though, is a guy who comes from a similar background under Sean Payton and is going to be able to communicate. And you mentioned that he was a tight ends coach, maybe even work with the offensive line a little bit more now. Everything's about communication throughout your staff. So even if you're an offensive coordinator who's not calling plays, you have a huge part during the week in just getting the game plan across to your players and the foundational concepts across to your players, especially up front. I think that's where it's going to be a big key for him. And likely, obviously, Ben's going to work with Caleb Williams personally, but this is going to be a group effort to get, I think, those two areas of their team improved, the quarterback and the offensive line. Dennis Allen's interesting to me because I do think, let me circle back to the whole thing. I think this is going to take a year of transition. This past year when they got Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen, all the weapons they got, you had people calling out Bears for the playoffs, Bears for the NFC title game, 12, 13 wins, all this stuff. I don't think they don't. First of all, they don't need to be doing that because I think the Bears did fall victim to high expectations in that city. It's going to take a transition year because Ben Johnson's offense is very different from what they were running last year, and Dennis Allen's defense is completely different from what they ran with Matt Eberflus the last 3 years. It's a ton of man coverage. He used to be more aggressive. He laid off the blitzing a little bit the last couple years as a head coach in New Orleans, but you're going from as heavy a four-man rush zone coverage team to now Dennis Allen, who runs a boatload of man coverage and is usually more aggressive with the blitzing. I think it is going to take a year of transition for Johnson and Allen both to get the type of players that they want in this defense. You might see some roster turnover over the next calendar year, this offseason and next, just to get the guys that fit in with this offense and with this defense. I'm not expecting the Bears to, some are going to expect it. I'm not expecting the Bears to make the postseason in 2025. I'm not going to pick it. Just the way things have been lately, especially we need to see a lot of development from some young players. I think it's a transition year to really establish the identities for Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen, and then we'll see where it goes in 26.
Well, listen, they have a lot to work with to get their guys in there. They're third in offseason assets this year. In terms of their draft capital, in terms of restructure potential, and in terms of effective cap space. 10th in draft capital, 7th in effective cap space with about $54.5 million in effective cap space as well. So a lot to work with Chicago, a lot to work with even in the building they have, right? You have an exciting young quarterback in Caleb Williams. You mentioned DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Darnell Wright, Braxton Jones on that offensive line as well. Some good players in the secondary between Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon. They were 11th overall in defensive grade last year, 10th in coverage grade. But in terms of what they need to do, they got to build in the trenches, especially in the interior offensive line. The Lions had the third highest graded offensive line when Ben Johnson was their offensive coordinator. So I think building in the offensive line is critical. I think really you could see that number 10 overall pick probably be an offensive lineman, whether that be a Will Campbell and kick him inside to guard or center, whether that be maybe a Calvin Banks Jr. and do the same thing. I think that's a really, really critical part. And defensive line, they were 24th in defensive line grade this past year as well. So I think building in the two trenches for them is huge. And the other thing, too, just help Caleb Williams along in his development, kind of slow the game down for him a little bit, and also utilize what he does best. I think there's a lot of times you mentioned before how the Bears last year with Shane Waldron calling plays, just use him as a straight drop back passer, roll him out a little bit, man. He's one of the best quarterbacks we've ever seen in college football in terms of when he was rolling out. Let him do that a little bit more. Let him, show off that creativity. I think Ben Johnson, how creative he is, he will put Caleb Williams in positions to succeed. And I think, looking at what he had at Jared Goff is not that, right? He's not a guy that's going to roll out. He's a guy who's going to win from the pocket. So Ben Johnson, as he's a great OC, catered his offense to that. Now with Caleb Williams, there's more of the playbook you could open up with, right? So we might not have even seen the best play calls from Ben Johnson, which is crazy to say. So I am really, really excited to see what a creative offensive mind like Ben Johnson can do with a guy who has limitless physical tools like Caleb Williams.
Absolutely. I mean, you just mentioned it, and Johnson even said in one of his first press conferences, look, Caleb Williams isn't Jared Goff, right? There's certain things that Jared Goff knows as a veteran that Caleb doesn't yet, and Caleb's obviously more mobile, and he's got to tailor the offense to him, but this team is going to improve as they improve in the trenches. It's about offensive line and defensive line. It was my concern going into 2024. It's my concern coming out of 2024. The interior, like you mentioned, especially, you got a good pair of tackles. You got to fix the inside, especially for a guy who holds the ball as long generally as Caleb Williams does. And then I just think, to me, they need more out of their D-line as well. I know you have Montez Sweat, but they need to find somebody else as a pass rusher who's a threat aside from Montez Sweat. Sweat is good. He's not one of the elite pass rushers in the NFL. It would really help them to get one of those guys off the other edge to really beef up that pass rush.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe the video. And if you don't have a PFF Plus subscription, you can get one to see all the premium stats that we talked about here on the show, plus the expert betting and fantasy advice over at subscribe.pff.com. The description is also right below, so if you are not a PFF Plus subscriber, you can become one today.